Welcome to our discussion on the escalating conflict in the Middle East. In the wake of Israel's recent military actions in Lebanon and Gaza, tensions in the region have surged to new heights. With global reactions ranging from condemnation to support, we aim to unpack the political, military and humanitarian implications of these attacks. We are joined by three distinguished guests. Adnan Nasser, a news correspondent based in Beirut, Middle East expert Tom Gross joins us from Tel Aviv, and political analyst Mohammed Najib joins us from Ramallah. Together, we will explore the motivations behind these military actions, the broader regional consequences, and the potential path forward. Thank you all for joining us on A News.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Let's just begin our discussions. Mr. Gross, what do you see as the primary motivation behind Israel's recent military actions in Lebanon and Gaza? Are these preemptive security measures retaliation or part of a larger geopolitical strategy?
No, I think the strategy of the government of Israel is at the end of the war that Hamas is no longer in control of Gaza. And what we saw in the ceasefire is during the hostage releases is that Hamas were at least giving the appearance of still being very much in control, staging, ceremonies when they released the hostages and so on, and parading around. And, from Israel's point of view, the war cannot end with Hamas still in control. Vis-a-vis Lebanon, I think Hezbollah are obviously greatly weakened, but I think Israel would like to see the Lebanese government and army regain full control and not have Hezbollah as a kind of, extra governmental group or militia in any kind of control. They'd like Hezbollah to become an unarmed, regular political party within Lebanon.
Mr. Najib, some argue that Israel is using military force to further its territorial and political goals. Do you believe these military actions are part of a broader strategy of expansion and suppression?
Actually, if the Israelis didn't achieve the target of the war of not keeping Hamas in control in Gaza during the past 16 months of the continuous war against Gaza, why do they think this time they can accomplish the target? Here, Palestinians believe that it came as internal pressure from the right-wing minister against Netanyahu to crack down on Hamas and in Gaza, and we passed the budget on the 31st of March and for political issues. And he doesn't want to be committed to the Americans, Egyptian and Qatari agreements that was reached with Hamas to continue the first phase and move to the second phase. And actually the Israeli Prime Minister was annoyed that the United States had opened a direct channel between Witkoff and the Hamas leadership in Qatar, and he did everything possible to destroy this channel and resume the war against Gaza.
Mr. Gross, Israel insists its actions are defensive, responding to threats from Hamas and Hezbollah. How does Israel justify its actions under international law?
Well, I'm not an international law expert, but I'm not sure at this point that Israel is claiming each and every action as defensive. I think right at the beginning of the war, that was the case. At this point, I think Israel is rather, open about the fact that Hamas must be defeated. So I can't talk about each and every airstrike, but the overall strategy is to try and have Hamas surrender. So were Hamas, for example, to stand down, and in fact the Palestinian Authority a day or two ago called on Hamas to give up power in Gaza, were that to be the case, then I don't think there would be justification under international law for Israel to continue an offensive. The offensive is against Hamas, not against Gaza.
Adnan, the humanitarian toll in Gaza and Lebanon has been severe, with reports of civilian casualties. How do you view the international response, and do you believe enough is being done to prevent further loss of life?
Well, to answer the latter part of the question, I would say no. I don't think that there's been enough done by the international community to stop the recent hostilities that have broken out between the Israelis and the Lebanese.
Yes.
You have to keep something in mind. The media of the UNIFIL officials have said to me that there's been no violations on the part of the Lebanon side since the ceasefire was enacted on November 27th. Most, if not all, the violations have been done from the Israelis. That's not me speaking, that's the UNIFIL. Now we're seeing this pressure being put on the Lebanese government to try to get to some sort of indirect talks with the Israelis to talk about lofty ideas such as normalization. Steve Witkoff, the U.S. envoy to the Middle East, has spoken about the idea of normalization between Lebanon and Israel, potentially Syria. This is a very big goal, so this is, I think, the priority of the United States. Right now, the immediate goal is to prevent any more violations of the ceasefire. This, I think, will be a little bit easier, but we need to see the Israelis pull back a little bit more than what they've done. And keep something in mind, Hezbollah has not really committed any acts of its own militarily. They're putting all their backing on the state. One of the main reason is that they're not in a position to fight the Israelis any longer. They want to give the state enough time to take the responsibility of defending the people of the South. But if the state doesn't do what it's supposed to do, then people of the South may take actions into their own hands.
Mr. Gross, what role does the United States play in either enabling or restraining Israel's military actions?
Well, since the Donald Trump came to power in January, there is clearly a more, Israel sympathetic government. Biden, although he was supportive of Israel, it was a kind of slightly stop-start. There was also quite a lot of criticism. Trump administration is less critical. They've got less sympathy for the population of Gaza. They're less focused on humanitarian matters and more focused on geostrategic matters. I also think the world has moved on a little bit. There's very much focus now on Ukraine-Russia talks, on domestic issues with migration and elsewhere in America, on other foreign policy issues, future of NATO, and so on. So I think there is less focus on the Middle East, and to the extent there is focus, it's not, it's the Americans with Iran, or they're bombing the Houthis in Yemen, and so on. So this has allowed the Israeli government to have more sort of freedom of action, as it would see it, than it did under the Biden administration.
So, Mr. Najib, what is the situation on the ground in Gaza and southern Lebanon right now? What kind of aid is needed and what obstacles exist in delivering it?
Yes, actually, the resumption of the Israeli war against Gaza since 8 days make the life of Palestinians, 2.3 million Palestinians live in Gaza, miserable and caused the humanitarian crisis. Especially Israel had closed all the crossing borders with Gaza since 25 days and didn't allow fuel, food, medicine, entry to Gaza. So now the Palestinians there fasting Ramadan month, but also there is mass displacement of dozens of thousands from north to the south, and some have been killed as the Israeli target bank is children, women, and civilian, while right now the IDF just declared the liquidation of 10 requested or wanted Hamas leaders and Islamic Jihad. So the other casualties and those injured are civilians, and this is catastrophic for the Palestinians.
Adnan, how are Arab states responding to these developments? Could this escalation lead to a larger regional war, or are we likely to see a containment of hostilities?
Well, I certainly hope we don't see a larger war. That's the last thing that this region needs. We need less violence, not more. We need reconciliation. We want an end to the occupation of Palestinian territories, and we also would like to see an end to the Israeli military incursion into southern Lebanon. This will require enormous amount of diplomatic support from the region and from the United States. Let's not forget, I'm sitting in the city that the Arab League had agreed upon in 2002 on what was called the Arab Initiative. The Arab Initiative stipulates that if Israel were to withdraw from all occupied territories and help create the establishment of a Palestinian independent state on the 1967 borders, there would be a general normalization. We're not there anymore. We're seeing independent action from Arab states like the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, etc., taking their own national interest into consideration before the general well-being of what they used to call the Arab nation. What we're seeing now is a condemnation from Arab states like Saudi Arabia for these actions in Gaza and South Lebanon, because Saudi Arabia, we do know, has an interest in normalization with Israel, but they also want to be seen, the state of Saudi Arabia wants to be seen as a champion for the rights of the occupied people of Palestine. So there needs to, at the end of the day, we're going to have to see some sort of what was called a two-state solution manifest into the future, or some sort of New Deal, if you want to call it that, to paraphrase or to use this phrase from President Donald Trump. We need some sort of plan and action that sees the creation of Palestinian statehood, and that's going to have to come from the United States alongside the Arab League.
Mr. Gross, how do you think, does Israel risk losing the normalization momentum it gained through the Abraham Accords? Could these military actions jeopardize relations with Gulf states?
So I'll answer 2 points. First of all, what your previous guest said, the mood in Israel has very much moved on from support for two states. So a few years ago, I would say that at least half the Israeli population was in favor of an independent Palestinian state. Today, it's much less than that. So there'll be a lot of, there's going to have to be a lot of building in confidence and so on before we can get back on track towards a two-state solution. Vis-a-vis normalization, it's obviously hard for the Saudis to directly engage Israel at a time when there are military actions in Gaza and in South Lebanon. However, I don't think the track towards normalization has been curtailed at all. I think pretty much every Arab state has, behind the scenes connections with Israel now. Even Syria, the new government in Syria, the new leader has freely used the word Israel. He praised Anwar Sadat, the former Egyptian leader, for making peace with Israel in a speech. And he also, the Syrian leader, criticized Yasser Arafat for turning down the 2000 or 2001 offer of a state under the Bill Clinton administration. So even in Syria, the new government, although many say it's Islamist, is moving towards a sort of slowly normalization with Israel. So other than Iran, which of course is not an Arab state, I don't know if there is really any opposition to Israel anymore there's opposition to Israel, but there's not opposition to normalization, the normalization track with Israel.
Mr. Najib, how do you see the role of international organizations like the United Nations and the International Criminal Court in holding parties accountable for potential war crimes?
Actually, Israel got a green card from Trump administration, and it feels free to act and to do whatever it ought to do against the Palestinians in Gaza. Trump wants to relocate the Palestinians of Gaza in other country, and also Israel established a department to facilitate that. So we don't see a significant role for the European Union, for the United Nations. Nothing more than they just condemned the Israeli targeting of Gaza and call for ceasefire and to allow the entry of civilian and humanitarian food and assistance to Gaza. But the role of the Arab countries, European Union and the United Nations is very poor this time, and Trump and Israel dominates the stage and give Israel a green light to do whatever it wants to do against the Palestinians, which encouraged them to behave in this aggressive policy.
Adnan, looking beyond this immediate crisis, what does this escalation mean for the long-term future of Israeli-Palestinian relations? What's your opinion?
Well, it's an unfortunate state of life that the Palestinians and the Israelis just can't seem to find a way to normalize relations and create this peace that we've all been seeking. I'm not putting the blame on the Palestinians. I would honestly have to put the blame on the Israelis for violating the ceasefire into Gaza. What we want right now is to pull back. We need this to not escalate even further. And remember, we have a president now sitting in the White House that has said he wants to be a champion of peace in the Middle East. We have his envoy here calling for normalization. So we need actions to meet the words. I don't think that this will escalate into a regional conflict. I think you had asked this question earlier in your program. But if we don't take the steps now, full diplomatic pressure is not put on the Israelis, and whatever that needs to be done on the Lebanese side will be done. There's no appetite in Beirut whatsoever to see this conflict take any steps further. The Lebanese are prepared to do what they have to do. The Syrians, of course, under this new leadership, they also do not have any desire, any aspirations to have open conflict with the Israelis. So there is a desire, there's an aspiration, and there's also actions ready to be followed on the part of the Arab side, at least Lebanon and Syria. So we need the Israelis to follow suit.
So, Mr. Gross, what's your opinion on this question?
Well, I'll only return to what I said before, that the main problem, there are two main problems from Israel's point of view. One is Hamas, and the second is the government in Iran. Vis-a-vis Hamas, I don't think, there's lots of internal divisions in Israel. There's lots of opposition to the government of Netanyahu for all kinds of reasons. But what there isn't opposition about is whether Hamas should stay in control of Gaza. I don't know anybody in Israel, including Israeli Arabs, that want Hamas to maintain control. And indeed, I suspect a great number of Gazans also don't want Hamas to stay in control. So this war vis-a-vis Gaza will either end with Hamas staying in control or not anymore staying in control. Israel is the stronger party, and I don't think the war will finish until Hamas surrenders, essentially, or gives up power. I don't think there's an appetite in Israel for a wider war. I mean, Israelis are also exhausted by war, by rocket attacks. Remember, the army is largely a reservist army. People leave their places of work to serve in the army for a number of weeks or months. People are exhausted. There is certainly not an appetite for a wider war. The only thing I'd say is, vis-a-vis Iran, it's still not quite clear how that's going to play out. And if there's a confrontation between the state of Israel and the Islamic government in Iran, things could flare up all over the place.
So, Mr. Najib, your opinion is also very important, and we would like to hear you.
Yeah, actually, I am reporting on this region for the past 25 years, and every time the IDF and Israel use the military force to achieve security, it was understandable. But this time, I see Israel use the force to achieve political goals to serve the Prime Minister and the right wing in the government. And the heavy crackdown on the northern West Bank, even on Gaza, in Syria, everywhere, to serve political issues, not necessarily to maintain the security for Israel. And this is very dangerous shift. And also it was criticized by former Israeli Defense Minister Benny Gantz, who said he cannot understand why Israel resumed the war in Gaza as well. Former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Olmert, who also said the same thing. So this time Israel used the military force for political expansion. If you drive in the West Bank streets, you'll find a huge sign says no future in Palestine, and advise the Palestinians to immigrate to Jordan. So this is kind of preparing for annexation of the West Bank to Israel and the displacement of the Palestinians from Gaza and the West Bank abroad and take over the land.
So, Mr. Najib, Adnan, and Mr. Gross, thank you all for sharing your insights with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The cost of war is always highest for civilians, and the international community remains divided on how to respond. The questions we have discussed today are not just about military actions, but about the future of the region and the possibility of lasting peace. That wraps up this episode of Context. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned for more analysis on the issues that shape our world.